Man, if I could go back in time and redo, well, I'd probably just make different mistakes. Some things that you add into your novel will bring some regret. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. As you slog through your now inescapably problematic manuscript, you'll wonder what the hell you were thinking when you added this stuff to your novel. Today, I'm going to share some of the things you might regret putting into your novel should you put them into your novel. These are things that make your novel more difficult to write. They introduce problems that you, the writer, need to overcome. I want to emphasize that a lot of these things don't necessarily affect the quality of the novel. Having them in there doesn't mean that the novel will be bad, but they will make it harder to write, which is where the regret comes from. All right, the first thing that you may regret putting in your novel, a large cast. Large because there's a lot of characters, not because the characters themselves are large. Although if they're really tall, they might have trouble fitting through doorway. This is about the number of characters you have in your novel, not how big those characters are. You can write a story about giants, that's fine, but if those giants have 40 or 50 cousins that need to be introduced, that's when things get tricky. A big cast brings some obvious problems. It's going to massively inflate the amount of work you need to do just to flesh out the novel. Every character needs a name, they need a physical description, some kind of backstory, they need relationships with the other characters, they need plot arcs, at least some of them need plot arcs, you have to characterize all of this information. A big cast also means you're going to have a lot of scenes with a lot of characters, which could mean big, complex dialogue exchanges with a bunch of different speakers, or lots of characters moving around a room, so things like action and blocking and dialogue, I said dialogue already, things like that can get more tricky with a large cast. Also, food. You'll need to order a ton of extra food, especially if the characters are giants. Lots of characters also means that your plotting needs to be on point. You only have so much space in a novel. Going into depth on any one arc or plot when you have a lot of different arcs or plots, which tends to happen when you have a lot of characters, means being very precise about how you go about it. More characters means you inherently have less page space to focus on any one arc. So when you do focus on those arcs, it needs to be done very, very well. A big cast is great if you can pull it off. It can add some depth to a story and really make a world feel real. It's also going to make the novel significantly harder to write and might be something that you wish you hadn't done. Next up, the complete opposite of the first point, having characters who are alone. This one is very common. It's very common to have sections of a novel or even an entire novel where a character is alone or mostly alone. But I would argue it still creates some difficulties in writing the novel. If a character is alone, then they don't have anybody to talk to. They don't have anybody to interact with. You lose a lot of the easy things that make writing more interesting. By having a character who's alone, you effectively reduce the types of things that you can write. You can't write dialogue if there's only one character. You can't describe another character's actions or have a fight scene or a romantic special time scene if there's just one character. You know what? You can kind of do the last one with one. You know what? I'm not even gonna. There's also knock on effects for the story when you have a character who's alone. When you have two or more characters in a scene, you can advance a couple of different plot arcs at the same time. You can characterize those characters, you can build up their relationships, you can move them along their arcs within the same scene. This saves page space, obviously, but also allows you to link your story together a bit more. If characters are alone, especially if you have different characters who are separate but alone, or even just different groups in different places, you'll need more page space to advance those arcs, and you will lose some cohesiveness that you would have had if your cast can interact together. I kind of mentioned this before a little bit, but any scene that's got just one character in it can be harder to write as well. There's no banter, there's no conversation, you're limited to describing the actions and reactions and thoughts of just that one character. You can't use the characters to foil off of one another. It just becomes more difficult to write. If your plot involves a lot of characters spending time alone, then you may regret that decision. as you sit alone working on your now problematic manuscript. Next thing that you might regret putting in your novel, naming a character something that's annoying. I didn't mean for all of these things to be character related, but here we are. Character names are something you should think a lot about before deciding on a character name. Character names can get annoying in a couple of different ways. Having two characters with very similar names will easily lead to confusion, both for you and potentially for the readers. Dwayne, Dave, Darren, Dirk, Daryl, Dimitri, and Darlene would like a word. No, wait. Daniel, not Dwayne. Dwayne's still sick with food poisoning, I think. Or maybe that was Darren. If you are of the sci-fi or fantasy persuasion, your long, complicated, culturally specific name with possibly too many vowels can also become annoying after a while. Remember, you're going to be typing a character name a lot as you draft, probably more than most other words in your novel. So keep that in mind before the syllables get into the double digits. There's other weird, annoying stuff that can happen with character names. If the name, again, in a sci-fi or fantasy context, is really close to an actual word, you may run into weird autocorrect things where the name sometimes gets changed to a word that isn't that name. There's lots of things that can happen that will make you regret how you've named a character, so be very careful when naming characters. Next up, and this is actually more than one thing, time travel, mind reading, or character reincarnation. I put these together because they are some examples of mystical or technological elements that make stories a lot harder to write. There are probably some other common examples of this sort of thing, but I think these three sort of capture the main ones. Time travel, any sort of time travel mechanic brings a lot of problems into any story. Beyond just the paradoxes and altering the past and whatnot, you've got the difficulty of being able to go forward or back to affect the plot. You have to be really careful with time travel, as it can quickly just become a reset button for the story, and it can make coming to a resolution difficult. You have to keep in mind that if you want to include time travel, it's probably going to become a major focus of your story. So if it's just something that you slot in there to get yourself out of a jam, you're probably going to regret adding it in. Mind reading or characters being able to read the thoughts of other characters can work, but I've also seen it become problematic. Knowing what other characters are thinking can remove a lot of tension. It can make thwarting the villain's plans way too easy, perhaps, and there's some weirdness that you can get into here. I critiqued a novel once that had a mind-reading ability in it, but the author had to make it not work for certain characters or certain situations because it would have affected the plot in a negative way. And it just ended up feeling really contrived and like it was something that would only work when it was convenient for the plot to have it work, and it didn't work when it was inconvenient for it to work. Bringing characters back to life. As a mechanic, this brings obvious problems because you discount the death of a character completely when there's an ability to just have them magically reappear. I know of a lot of stories that have done this. I don't know of any stories where it's like been a major selling point of the story. It can backfire in a lot of different ways, as I mentioned, because you discount the impact of that moment by essentially undoing it. It removes tension because characters don't have to deal with consequences of their actions. And it can kind of retroactively ruin a moment if you have a big, momentous, emotionally impactful scene where we lose a character and then they just come back later on like nothing happened. That's usually not a great recipe for great writing. There's probably other mechanics like this. I'd love to hear some in the comments. There's probably obvious ones that I didn't think of when I was writing out the outline for this video. But anyway, speaking of this video, I am about to finish speaking about this video because we're at the end of the video. So there you have it. I'd love to hear about some of the things you've regretted putting in your stories in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.